Okay, bonjour à tout le monde, and thank you for having me. My name is Milagros Santamaria. I'm from Argentina. I am a lawyer currently based in Lisbon, and I'm a crypto-legal consultant working at One Big Lab. And myself, with other niche professionals, lawyers, economists, and tax advisors, we provide crypto-legal services and solutions for DAOs and other blockchain-based products. And I'm here today to talk about DAO legal frameworks. I'm pretty sure that most of you right now already know what a DAO is, but just to start with the right foot, a DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization. It's a blockchain-based entity where the community owns and manages it. So, and by community, I mean token holders, of course, mostly. And in other words, it's a set of smart contracts that enables people who are part of it to coordinate and work together as a community. And I've come today to talk about this specific subject in very little time that'd be quite complicated and expensive. So I'll do my best to do it in single steps so everyone can fill in and then we can have a little debate on the matter. But the best way that we can start before we start talking about jurisdictions and entities and taxes and not going to jail, I think that we should start with asking this question. I'm having technical issues. Is it the other way around? There you go. So the first question would be to DAO or not to DAO? And please appreciate my low quality memes along the presentation as well. And this is because why should we care about DAOs as a whole? DAOs have come today to optimize the way that we organize ourselves as a community and as a collective. Because nowadays, if we want to organize ourselves, we would have to go through time-consuming, tiring, costly, and very bureaucratic processes of traditional organizations. So DAOs come here to help us optimize the way that we organize ourselves, because not everyone in the world, especially talking from a third world country, and don't get me wrong, I love Argentina, beautiful place, but to have people organized for a common goal can become quite complicated if you don't have the right tools, access, or money. So DAOs help us do that. They help people organize themselves with a couple of clicks, copy-paste wallets, and then you have your DAO fully operating. So if a group of people actually understands or thinks that a DAO is the best way to organize themselves, then a different question arises. That's pretty much why maybe most of you are here today. That's, does my DAO actually need a legal wrapper? And there are two questions that we should ask ourselves on this matter to realize, is it necessary or is it not necessary? And this one is the first one, and it has to do with off-chain operations. After a DAO is created, or by the moment that we start trying to realize how are we going to organize it, we ask ourselves, is there going to be the need of the execution of off-chain operations? Are we as a DAO going to need to open a bank account? Are we going to need to sign contracts, hire people, file and return taxes? Are we going to need to interact with other individuals or institutions that are out of the digital space, in the mid space? If this is positive, then legal wrapper could be an important consideration. And then we would go to consideration number 2. And this one has to do with limited liability for members, because it's important for DAOs to mitigate, allocate, or reduce risks. So they're not considered a general partnership. So they don't have to worry about joint responsibility. So whatever problem that arises from the doings, the activities, or the operations of the DAO doesn't rely fully on the patrimony of some members or of the members, and there's this entity before them, a legal wrapper, to help them have a step before that. That's pretty simple to understand. It's a problem that's pretty common because nowadays the world's not ready for all of what DAOs have to offer. That for sure. So question 1, off-chain operations and limited liability. Okay. If we can say yes to this, then we have to ask another question to realize, how can we best choose a legal wrapper for a DAO? And this has to do on what's the purpose of the DAO. And please appreciate the meme of Ryan Gosling going like, what do you want? What is the goal? What kind of activities? Why are they doing it? when we try to understand this is that it will be easier for the DAO itself to see what kind of DAO is it. Is it a social DAO? Is it a philanthropic DAO? Is it a venture DAO? Is it a collector DAO, a collective DAO? What kind of DAO is it? And once we get to fully understand this, the question 1 and 2 become a lot easier. Okay? And there's another part of the purpose that shows off after we ask this question. And this has to do on the fact of whether they're non-profit or for-profit. In accordance to the purpose of the DAO and the type of DAO, is it going to be a non-profit or a for-profit? And if it's a for-profit, okay, we're talking about the generation of profit, but are they going to have member distribution? I mean, a profit distribution for members? From this question is that we can pass to another a little bit more uncomfortable or more nerve-wracking, because please remember there is not one specific set of entity for all DAOs. Every DAO is different, and the type of entity or legal wrapper that we choose should align with all these different aspects, so it's actually coherent and can become compliant. So after we asked all these questions and considering whether it's non-profit or for-profit and about the distribution of profit for members or not, is that we have to start thinking about taxes and tokenomics. Understanding the activity of the DAO and later on choosing a jurisdiction, we're going to need to understand how taxes apply to such activities. How, beyond the activity itself, how the jurisdiction tries blockchain-related activities. And then comes how does the jurisdictions or the jurisdictions are interconnected with the activity of the DAO treat the different tokens. I worked or keep a very close relationship with a law firm back in Argentina that worked with international tax planning, and they would always say this phrase. They would say, in this world, nothing can be said to be certain except taxes. And this kind of dad joke, I would hear it all the time. So for me, it's no longer that funny, but nowadays, so far, maybe I would even add gas fees if it applies. But honestly, taxes are important, and it's directly related to the tokenomics. What are the perks of the tokens that the DAOs are going to issue? Are we talking about governance tokens? What are their characteristics and the rights that token holders are going to have? So we can know if they're talking about a security, a financial instrument or not, or a utility token, or a hybrid. And then is the DAO also going to have a payment token? Is it going to have two? What is going to be the relationship between the two? Because depending the type of entity, and from that, the type of jurisdiction that we're going to choose, is that we're going to understand how these two are going to relate, which is quite a heavy question to know as well. And there's something else to mention, is that there's this idea around the ecosystem that finding a legal wrapper is a one fully thing to do. And there's no book that says, actually, I don't think there's a very specific book or whatsoever, beyond some really good papers and research on the matter, that if a DAO finds a legal wrapper, then it should be fully wrapped in that entity or legal wrapper. Because siloed structures are also an option. What do I mean with a siloed structure? And what I mean is that you can have different legal wrappers, or one legal wrapper just handle or take charge of one activity of the DAO. Different entities or legal wrappers can wrap the different operations or activities that we're talking about. So far, I've given a lot of information, so I'm going to recapitulate a little bit with an example. Say we have a DAO, a group of people who want to take the possibility of creating a DAO for a charitable purpose, mostly centered in the US. So they will most likely need to pursue off-chain operations, therefore to receive funds. So that's French. So they would need to open a bank account. Okay, off-chain operations, limited liability for the members. What they're doing is they're going to be handling other people's money, so they're going to need limited liability. And they want to be a nonprofit. Here, taxes are an important part of it, because if we're talking about a nonprofit purpose that can be as well recognized as such, therefore charitable, by the IRS in the US or any other, talking about other jurisdictions, it could be the other entity that handles taxes, but we're talking about the US right now, then this group of people as a DAO could consider utilizing the benefit of the tax exemption of 501c3 of the IRS code. So people who want to create a philanthropic DAO with a charitable purpose could consider, first of all, incorporating as a corporation, and then to file for 501c3, become a foundation, and therefore have a tax-exempt status. So when you think about the DAO legal framework and what can actually suit best your DAO, taxes can be a benefit on those cases. And this whole little path is always helpful. But talking as well on the siloed idea is that even that foundation could only rob the treasury of the DAO itself. And later on the whole protocol, the DAO itself of the protocol, of the governance of the protocol, could be unincorporated or in a different entity. And even a different entity could be the one that, for example, holds the IP. Or a different entity in different cases as well be the one that issues the tokens from a different place. So this siloed structure could work as an umbrella of the way that we want to organize our DAO and the different operations and activities. So this was an example of what we were saying on a nonprofit, and we were given an example of the US. The thing about the US, beyond the fact that most of the times I've spoken with people about DAO legal wrappers, the first thing they would mention would be Wyoming and DAO LLCs, but these are not the only options. I will talk about a little bit on the international side as well. But what I'm trying to say is that when we find a DAO that is strongly tied to the US regarding members, control of income and treasury, and as well on the operation of the protocol, then it's most likely that they're going to feel a lot more comfortable with finding a US domestic structure. And we know about Wyoming DAO LLCs. We know about Tennessee's DAOs. That's the same thing, but without DA, because it's a little bit maybe more realistic on the autonomous kind of part. But most people might be surprised on the fact that regular LLCs can be quite an interesting options for DAO to find legal wrapper for different DAOs. This is because they provide the flexibility of a partnership related to taxes, because you don't have to double pay taxes, but as well with the limited liability of corporations. Again, I will repeat the fact that not every structure works for every DAO, because every DAO is different. So in this case, a regular LLC could work, or even a corporation, if a DAO is ready to sacrifice different aspects of its working. And this means most likely sacrificing part of the decentralization and the autonomous counterpart. But what I wanted to make sure for everyone to understand is that regular LLCs are also an option. Let me as well give an example so it can be a little bit more practical. Let's say we have a group of people who want to get together, put their funds together so they can invest together into other crypto-related projects or other DAOs. And they realize most of the members are from the US and most of the projects are developed in the US, which was going to make the analysis a lot easier to say, okay, let's find a US entity. And then it's a possibility of them, for them to incorporate as a Delaware LLC, which would cost them even less time and money because it's something that's so used. Okay, they're going to need to raise funds. It's easier for VCs to feel safe around this kind of spectrum. But there is a little detail that there is a requirement for member lists. This means that members would have to feel comfortable having to disclose who they are, and every time there is a new member, they would have to do an update. In this case, it would be less positive for them, and they would need to realize what are they willing to sacrifice on the concept of DAOs to actually do so. This part, we can accept it, we can understand it, and there's also the option of using the DAO LLCs in the US that don't have this specific requirement to maybe find an option. And we also have Vermont blockchain-based LLCs and Colorado's LCAs. These are cooperatives, which we can see from many point of views how similar this kind of structures are with the way that DAOs work. It's a member-based entity created for members, by members as well. And the thing about this kind of entity is that it can be a little bit more rough with anonymity, but it's really good when we're trying to find a DAO that is also for-profit and tries to do profit distribution for members based on contribution. And I already explained on the non-profit part how the US has some interesting options for DAOs who want to be, with a charitable purpose, able to optimize the way they deal with taxes, be it with private foundations, like the first example, the political nonprofits, social clubs, and also talking about nonprofits, unincorporated nonprofit associations, with this last one being or having the particular benefit that when it comes to the formality of incorporating, it's still less rigid because they don't require state filing. Okay, so we're talking about the option that most people so far that I have spoken to know about the US, but the space and the ecosystem is quite international. We're in Europe right now having this conversation in this conference, so it's not always US based. And if we have a group of people that want to form a DAO and realize it's actually not US centered or based, and members are not mostly from the US, and that that control of the income or the treasury is not from the US, then other international options become a little bit clearer. Marshall Islands is a little bit of state in the middle because they're an associate state from the US, and they also have a specific DAO LLC regulation on the matter that was actually based on the LLC Act of Delaware. That's very similar. And then we can look a little bit more to Europe, where we're right now. We can think about Malta. Malta has technology arrangements that also recognizes DAOs in case they want to find a legal wrapper. Still, because of the maybe rigid amount of regulation on the matter, it could be better used for looking for licenses for different blockchain-related projects. Then we can talk about Liechtenstein and Switzerland. These two countries are one of the countries with the most regulations on blockchain. And this is important because whenever incorporating or having a project where you can have legal certainty from the very first moment, you can sleep better at night on the sense that you know how things are treated. It was last year that Liechtenstein, it was there was a research by PwC that said that Liechtenstein was indeed the place in the world with the most clearer tax regulation and treatment. So you would know how your taxes will be treated, even with the possibility of a DAO to find a legal wrapper. A legal wrapper in Liechtenstein for a DAO could be in the form of a foundation or a cooperative, as well with the possibility of having a purpose trust, which is another kind of structure that's possible to use for DAOs. And then in Switzerland, it's quite known, because we also know we have the Ethereum Foundation, is the possibility of having an association. The thing about this last two structure is that you can have the regulatory certainty that you're looking for, but setting them up can be a lot or quite more costly than with the rest of the structures that we already mentioned, which is something that's DAOs should bear into account before they start. This kind of consideration have to do with the contingency planning that should be done before the deployment of the DAO. So the mantra of move fast, break things doesn't become an unhealthy and dangerous, costly mindset. And we must also admit that the regulatory uncertainty makes this feeling of having a gigantic playground around the world, because there's not so much regulation or just gray areas, become the floor is lava pretty fast. Beyond the fact that this room feels like lava a little bit right now, but that's another story. So the things that we have discussed so far have to do with the little mind path that we have done to understand which kind of DAO are we having with its purpose and what are they looking for in the matter of income, for-profit, non-profit, and as well the different jurisdictions that can be useful. But beyond that, it's important to make these questions at the right time before governance tokens on voting on what to do when you think you found the right structure are given away for a community that doesn't really understand what they're doing. So a roadmap, even for a scalable decentralization, is smart to do before anything is done. There's very few information actually on this matter, and there are a few cases that can be used as examples. And there's another very interesting, two more different jurisdictions that are worth to mention. These are, as well in Europe, the Channel Islands with Guernsey and Jersey's Purpose Trust that can be very useful for the holding of IP. And then we have foundation companies in Cayman Islands. And foundation companies can be pretty good or can be a very attractive kind of option for DAOs that are looking for decentralization and anonymity, bearing into account the little danger or upgrowing danger that Cayman Islands were considered, or they were listed by the European Anti-Money Laundering in the blacklist, as well in the grey list of financial task force. So please know that whenever choosing this kind of offshore or international options, there is a possibility of future regulations or problems or challenges that could arise because of the part of trying to maintain the anonymity and the decentralization. Beyond the fact that in the other options, using different entities as founders to give a little bit more opacity and security for founders is also an option, but international tax advice as well as legal advice is very necessary in this case. And I know this is a lot of information in very little time. I'm so sorry about that. But I can show you a graphic that should help you a little bit with that. That feels a little bit like this. I don't know, it feels a little bit like this because I was skimming. This is very little time for a very complicated subject with very little examples. But this one is a little bit more accurate for everyone. When I was trying to simplify, it felt a little bit like that. But in all seriousness, there are two very good papers. One by Rodrigo Seria that was not able to perform yesterday with Chris Bummer about DAO legal wrappers, but a very good research on the matter and a good graphic on it, as well as the one created by Miles Jennings and David Kerr that I really recommend to see. Let's go a little bit back so it's easier. So we asked ourselves, first of all, to DAO or not to DAO? Do we want to set up a DAO and why? Are we going to need to execute off-chain operations? Do we need limited liability? Okay, so what's the purpose of the DAO? Is it going to be a non-profit or a for-profit? Do members need, or are we going to want to give them distribution of those profits? How much do we care about decentralization and anonymity? Please remember nationality and trade of business so we can know how much we would worry about having problems in the US or in different actual jurisdictions as well, the EU, on how to treat, for example, financial instruments. And on this case, I will give you a little bit of homework. Please don't hate me, on the BitMEX case, and tokens and tax. And just to show you as an example of what we're doing right now and how we're doing in the middle of an analysis to understand how to handle it, we've been working with the OpenBino project for a while now. The OpenBino project is an open source platform, decentralized, that enables wineries all around the world to tokenize their bottles of wine. So they're able to sell these tokens that represent bottles of wine from the very moment of harvesting. And we've been working for them for a while. Even the CEO of it, Mike Tango Bravo, presented yesterday on biodigital certification, so wineries will be able to self-certify using blockchain. And the next step of what we're trying to do with them is the OpenBino DAO, with a little bit and slightly different concept to what we've seen so far. Because in this kind of DAO token holders would earn revenue every time there is a transaction. So they would earn revenue from transaction fees from the decentralized platform of the tokens that are generated by each of the wineries that are tokenizing their wine. So token holders, DAO token holders, can therefore decide what to do as a community with such treasury. And we're in the middle of this analysis to understand what are going to be the perks of the tokens and therefore what the tax implications of those tokens. In Spanish, there's a saying that doesn't sound as fun actually in English, that it doesn't matter if you have a monkey with a silk dress, it's still a monkey. It doesn't matter how a token is called or how you want to treat it. The inherent nature of the token shows how the token is going to be treated and classified and therefore regulated in the jurisdiction that we're talking about. This is a lot of information in very little time. I'm almost done, don't worry. And the thing that I want to let everyone know that is clear that there's no one simple way to give an answer to legal wrappers for DAOs. There are different dynamics, there are different needs, there are different jurisdictions, they have to do with members, but it's still possible. And beyond the fact of doing your own research, we can give you a hand on this matter. So please don't hesitate to contact us. We believe that building is not only for developers, and these are exciting times for lawyers, for policymakers, for everyone who wants to make the step from Web 2 to Web 3 in a good way, without the bad press for lawyers most of the time, because there's no one who's actually happy when a lawyer comes into a room, so I hope you guys are less upset than when you came in. So, yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Is there a moment in time or a tool where basically, I wouldn't say we substitute lawyers, but get to a point where things are more clear? Let me finish. So if you were to start a company today, you kind of know in the country you reside, more or less, the type of incorporation you should follow. How far are we when it comes to DAOs incorporations and also to all the assessment of tokens, if it's a utility token, if it's a security token? Is there a way to sort of lower the barriers to build so that to start you don't need like 20K in legal fees to just get an opinion on that?
That's a good question. That would leave me without a job. But all jokes aside, actually, following this path to understand better who are you going to be your members, from where the control as well of the income and the treasury is going to come from, and the characteristics of the tokens are going to make it a lot easier to when you actually have to decide where you want to have the legal wrapper for your DAO. From then on, you're actually going to need a lawyer for the incorporation counterpart of the entity that you're choosing. But if you already have all this part figured out, it would only be for you to explain that to them. So them, after confirming that everything is aligned, do it for you. And I would recommend doing this analysis before the deployment of the DAO itself, because and maybe as well related to the governance tokens that you're going to give away and the kind of power of voting that you're going to give to the rest of the members. But following this kind of path, after you understand whether it's going to be a for-profit or non-profit and members, where they're going to be from, and tokenomics, then after that, it should be easier for you to find legal assistance that's not overtaking the rest of the project.
Thanks for doing the talk. By the way, there's one project called Kali DAO. You go on a website and it just creates your DAOs for you. One question about the founders' residence themselves. So you were talking about this international BVIs, XYZ. Now, there was a case a couple of months ago, I think we all heard about Terra. Do Kwon was living in South Korea, but the company was registered in Singapore. And I think a lot of crypto founders register in BVI, came in because it's easy. Do you think we'll start to see a trend where the residency of the people will apply and where the company is actually registered? Because a lot of this is kind of happening, and Do Kwon needs to pay, I think, 80 million in South Korean taxes. The Singapore entity essentially just doesn't exist because he was, and the team was in South Korea. So what's your views on that?
I believe on this sense that part of the planning that a lot of projects do go beyond of where it would be good to have the legal wrapper. So the founders and the members are in jurisdictions where it wouldn't be a problem for the project after it's deployed. So I think that's something that is happening, is going to keep happening. But to have a transparent, respectable kind of project, you would also want everyone to know that what you're doing is not sketchy. And that's why, beyond of the fact that right now, Cayman Islands is one of the most used structures and still valid because you're not doing anything wrong, it's still legal. You know that the international pressure on this kind of structure is gonna become stronger each time. So the more you can be clear and transparent and less dodgy, the better for your project. You can still choose not to, but that depends on the core values of each project itself.
But the founders will get a court case in their original country, regardless of where the company's registered. That's kind of the point. Like, if we'll see this trend, I was curious if you'll see it this year, where founders will start getting indicted in their home country, regardless if they're in BVI or Singapore. Yeah.
What I've seen a couple of times to avoid that is those founders of the legal wrappers of the DAOs or the projects are not the persons themselves, but actually other trustees of purpose trusts or different kind of trusts or companies that have them to give a little bit more opacity to those kind of structures, which usually not a lot of people make this kind of analysis before they invest or they interact with platforms or blockchain-related projects, but are a little bit of the alarms that make us think, why are they using a special shade of protection? So that's another option of what they do, just opacity.
Hi, thank you for the talk. Sorry for the husky voice. Actually, my question is more going to rely on what do you think is a DAO and is not a DAO. There's actually Web2 platforms that are being deployed for French government entities called participative democracy, where you're going to have votations, consultations, and basically anybody that can actually interact as a DAO. Would you consider that it is not a DAO because it doesn't have a legal framework, a tokenomics, and taxations? Or do you consider that it can be seen as a DAO because it interacts in a societal manner as a DAO?
Well, I think that I once heard the phrase that there are more definition of what a DAO is than actual DAOs in the world right now. So it's a super interesting debate because we're talking about a decentralized autonomous organization, but to be fully decentralized, that's like 0.02% maybe of what they are. There's actually a percentage I don't remember, but it's a number like that. So maybe we're not talking about decentralized autonomous organization, we're just talking about on-chain governance, which is perfectly fine to whatever kind of project that they want to do it. Or maybe we're talking about a decentralized autonomous corporation. So the fact of having on-chain governance maybe would be the base point and voting for members to understand what kind of organization that we're having, and which is like englobating them in the same concept, so it's easier to understand. But
basically, it would be it's on chain, so it's a DAO. If it's stored in the cloud, for example, or any other distributed architecture, it would not be considered a DAO because it's not using Web3 technologies, right?
I feel as people can always be against we can make a debate out of it, that if we're talking about Web3, then we're talking about a DAO. If we go to Web2, maybe not yet. At the same time, I'm a believer that sometimes you need Web2 training wheels before you feel ready to fully drive stick as a Web3 DAO, because every project that is fully decentralized once started being centralized. And that's what we're talking about, being ready with this kind of structure before you fully deploy to avoid potential issues.
Thank you very much.
Please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the talk. Do you think that the same way that we saw Open Zeppelin and different code audit firms review code for projects, are we going to see those kind of open source legal information to be able to implement in DAOs?
Absolutely. I feel that being able... code audit is fundamental, because I once heard that it's not whether you were hacked or not hacked, it's were you already hacked or are you going to be hacked? And for future projects, especially for what is up to come for regulation, it's important for them to show that at least they made the according due diligence to feel sure enough that they can deploy their project, and to have a badge of, okay, this entity, these people, this organization told me that everything is okay. So code audit, beyond the fact of needed a good software factor, of course, is fundamental to feel as safe as possible on things that are very likely to happen, especially for projects that cannot have it fully functional all the time having code audit.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have a question, but like I have a comment. You showed the jurisdictions, especially in the EU, that can be suitable to establish an entity. One of them was Malta, and the other one was like, sorry, like I remember also like Cayman Islands and BVI. Yeah. So I think they may have like more like kind of like favorable structure, legal structure to establish an entity. But for example, from AML perspective, I know that like EU, for example, sees Malta or like Cayman Islands on a really high risk. Yeah. And they're not really, they don't say anything about BVI, but like when we think about the whole region, like they see many high risk areas. So maybe also I can get your comment on that in the incorporation it may be favorable, but maybe in the long term after they incorporated due to other regulations, maybe they're not going to survive actually.
Absolutely. This especially has to do with the fact that this year the Cayman Islands got blacklisted by the European anti-money laundering, and also grey-listed. And BVI is mostly an option used for token issuance, but they're about to get regulated on that matter as well. So whenever trying to find the different options, founders of the DAO need to see how risk-averse they are on the different jurisdictions that are considering, and what they're willing to sacrifice to find a safer option related, especially with decentralization and anonymity. But if you're trying to be transparent, and there was a talk earlier that had to do on how to be anonymous, not go to jail, and basically is don't be transparent, because in the end, if you're not doing anything dodgy, should be good. Thank you.